This changes everything. I love that. This changes everything. I don't know. He just seems to write better and better and better. And this one was just, I found to be like most of it is now underlined.
Where are we starting? What page?
What good that does. Are we starting with chapter 6?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. Chapter 6 in the Acts book.
Got it.
Got it?
Yep.
So there's a couple of things that as we look and read that I want us to pay a little bit of attention to, and that's the kingdom of God. So what is that mean when we're reading Acts particularly, but New Testament generally? And hospitality. What is that? We already know that the same author wrote Luke and Acts, and a major theme in Luke is hospitality, and our author clearly sees that carry over here into Acts. And so as we look at these, and I want us to think about what does hospitality mean, because it has to do with a lot of Hebrew Bible things as well as New Testament things, theology being the thing. Okay, so with that, what jumped out at you?
How political it was.
Yes, exactly.
1:18. In the middle, it says, no one in Acts blends faith with patriotism or dutiful civic devotion. Communities of faith do not become settings for individuals to seek out their own kind and avoid believers of other ethnic identities who live out their faith differently. Religious belief is no private matter in Acts. And I believe this is a really good comment.
Yeah. Well,
commitment to Jesus affects everything about a person's life and how a person understands his or her place in the world. And if that doesn't say about his hospitality,
yep,
a mouthful.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Well,
Yep.
and the part you left out, implications for one's spending habits, political loyalties, and social circles.
Yeah.
That commitment to Jesus.
Right. Yes.
It is should.
Very important.
A couple times throughout the chapter relating to politics, considering that this was published in 2020, how prescient he was is about things that are actually really unfolding right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but if you think about it, they were unfolding then too.
Yeah.
Exactly. But he seems to have,
it just hasn't gone away.
Yeah. He's got another book coming out right now.
Something that strikes with me. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who remarked about, well, I held the baby and I said that was the 8th child of this couple. And this woman says, oh my gosh, are they on welfare? And I said, no, he is paramedic and she works as well, and they have 8 children. So what? This is just a beautiful baby. Well, this woman says again, then they must be getting money from someplace to help them, because 8 children, my goodness. And what about all these that get money from Social Security because they're not married and they keep on having kids, and because they get the money from Social Security or other donations, they just keep on having babies. I just can't understand.
Bless your heart.
Yeah.
Do a
Yes.
Southern thing.
And this is a woman who has a lot of money.
And unwilling to share it and unwilling to understand.
And if only getting money from Social Security when you needed it was that easy.
Really.
Doesn't do a lot
Exactly.
for
Yeah,
us.
Social Security is in the business of denying disability, Social Security disability.
Awful.
It's impossible to get Social Security disability. So I don't know what. I know because we applied for it. Yeah.
My cousin, our niece sure should have it. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. No, you have to get a lawyer to get Social Security disability. So I don't know how anybody thinks they just hand that out. And we always, in those conversations and in the ones that are happening in our government today is like, did you not remember that Social Security is my money? Did you not remember that? I worked my lifetime and put that, and just because the government told me I had to put that money aside doesn't make it any less my money.
Exactly. Exactly. We were forced into it, and now we're being asked why we want it. It's like, whatever.
Oh my God.
So, a person who preaches the gospel, as a person who preaches the gospel, it's so, you all know this because you're all good, wonderful people, but that line is so hard. The sort of, you can't, you're preaching politics line. It's an incredibly squiggly line, because here we are, people on the bottom of page 116, people who say that Jesus wasn't interested in politics misunderstand that at the heart of his message and his compassionate deeds was a vision for a new society, a different way for people to live together into the wholeness, justice, human flourishing, reconciliation, and generosity that God desires. You can't avoid preaching that. And when you preach it, you can't preach that. That's politics.
And you make enemies.
It hits us close to home, right? Because it hits the fact that it's about our money. And so we want to fight about that. How do we use our money? What I feel is my money. And yet Jesus said, "Would it give to Caesar what is Caesar's," as he was holding that coin. And we live in a temporal world. And so I always think that's an interesting conflict. So we're always concerned about what we perceive as ours.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that level of power that as human beings, we don't want to give up our own agency.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I think it's a really a human, our humanness fights against the politics unless they feed our sin nature.
Mm.
And I think that's what we're seeing. We want power. We want to keep what we think is ours and hang on to it, even if we'd all be better off if we did a little more sharing. Right.
It boils down to we don't trust God to take care of us.
And I think that our author, where was he writing that?
Yeah.
I mean, that was clear in this chapter.
Yeah, I was looking for a quote. I can't find it because I didn't underline everything.
About everything here.
Not everything.
Oh, the part about 116. I'll let you go ahead and look. I was just underlined about political statements about superiority.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely politics. Political statements, king of the Jews, superiority about privilege and value, if there was any.
Yep.
So Pilate has his own. But he's trying.
Yeah.
Next paragraph's important too. God, please let me talk. He doesn't want to draw overly simple connections between politics today and the kingdom of God. He says his life, and then it talks on about the status quo, etc. Values and social ideals wasn't what they wanted because it wasn't their power.
Well, regarding hospitality, I think that one thing in our reading that has really stuck out to me is going back to the what do they call him? The Ethiopian court official.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
eunuch.
The
You know, that they were so, that throughout Acts, it seems they're so open to other people.
oh yeah, inclusive. Yeah.
So inclusive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, that's the hallmark of hospitality, to be inclusive and open to others. And how did the church change to where it wasn't open
Right. Right. Well, and
anymore, that it wanted, you know, everybody to kind of follow one path?
right. Right. Yeah. Well, and where did the church change in not questioning the powers?
Well, I was reading, and the other day it was talking about the difference in the timeline between the Western and Eastern churches. That at that time, you know, when they were all considered one Catholic, one group together, and then it had to have been human power that my way is better than your way. And then I was remembering Hildegard of Bingen and the fight between the Celtic and the Roman, when it was, again, you must be. And I don't know when it came in that only men could, I don't know when that happened.
It's when there was an established church.
Yeah.
But that still, I mean, that's, I have to ask the question, is that part of the human condition? You know, I want to believe absolutely and completely that humanity was created in God's image, beautiful, wonderful, good. All of those things created in God's image, and that our very first sin was wanting to be God, wanting to be have that kind of power that God has, that power of creation, and it just seems to me like that's the bedrock. And that is the joy of creation as well, that we are created, so that he wrote about that too, that so that, you know, we're not created to just do and be God's little minions, right? We have all this power to choose, and to choose poorly, and to choose rightly, and to, you know, to be full human being as God created us. And that's where we find ourselves.
So could you say that sin in a way is the conflict of us choosing to be gods
Right.
or to serve God?
I think so. I mean, I think so. I think that's the root of sin, is wanting to be God.
And so how often do I choose that in my own life, right? I mean, that's a question for me to apply to me.
Yeah. Yeah. How often do I have to, you know, fall on my knees and ask forgiveness again,
Oh.
because I want.
You would think we would figure it out, but every day, I tell you.
I think for me, the definition of wisdom is a little bit less of that.
And then just
think
when you
they
think,
figured it
I
out, but
think
they
I
wanna
got
follow it.
this.
Yeah,
you
and then
backtrack.
yeah, exactly. I do it again. I do it again. I think, oh God, I did it again. I went and said, went and did that, and no, yeah, that's because I want to be God. I want to be the chooser. I want to be the decider. I want to be in control.
We want to tell God, you're not the boss of me.
You're not
That's right.
Mhm.
That's exactly right.
We teach our little kids to say that, and then we say, accept.
Except,
How do you-
so,
how do
so that's a tough go, isn't it?
Mhm.
it is?
I mean, so if how do we raise strong kids, and faithful kids?
At the same time. it
This
is-
is hard stuff,
Mhm.
right? And how do we raise? I mean, I've been doing this for a lifetime, trying to figure out how to raise kids and teach kids, and how do we raise up kids in ways that they can trust God, and at the same time, wherever our author wrote it here, that how the church is not God, right? The church itself is not God. The church itself is sinful. I mean, the church is sinful itself. The church is fallen itself. And so we continue always, he says on page way at the end now, page 139 in the smack dab middle, that's got underlines and stars. At that churches may be with the reality of the Spirit among them when they open themselves to the fullness of God's grace, such as when they become places that are more hospitable, more inclusive, more forgiving, and more daring.
Mhm.
Whenever the Spirit is floating around and on fire, we humans tend to sin. I mean, what does it look like to be more daring?
Or I was thinking what Catherine reminded us about hospitality. What does that look like today?
Yeah.
Does that look like, I mean, I know what it looked like in my parents' lives, and I know what it looked like when my children were young, but what does that look like at this stage of life? What does hospitality look like outside of the boxes that we put hospitality in? Because
And-
we put hospitality in these very American,
Yes, we do.
European boxes. So and the word inclusion comes, inclusion, diversity, acceptance. Those are the words that come to me when I think about this chapter and hospitality. But how do we apply that to our lives?
Right.
And not just in accepting them into the church building.
Yeah. Well,
What
and
are we gonna do with that hospitality with these people who are believers in ISIS and who have now got all this stuff going on in Louisiana that has brought hatred to a lot of people's hearts? How are we going to get past that and issue hospitality to those people?
right. And what is the Hebrew Bible? I mean, there are mandates about hospitality. And when those mandates are broken, terrible things happen to people. Right. So is that what we're seeing? Is the breakdown of hospitality?
Mention one of those mandates so I can follow you.
The story.
Even in the Quran, you've got the
Hmm?
hospitality, the Middle Eastern concept of hospitality. What you're
Can't
seeing,
understand you, Ann.
Well, she's having trouble talking, so you're just going to have to do your best.
I'll just listen.
Well, I mean, you have to. I mean, when somebody comes to your door asking for, to please, can I have come in and rest? Please, can I have something to eat? You're bound to say yes. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is a story of the lack of hospitality. And look what happened. I mean, that's the,
If you're going back to Genesis, it's a story of lack of hospitality when whoever started the sin of wanting to be like God, it was a matter of power of taking it for oneself
Mhm.
rather than the sharing.
Yeah. Yeah.
My scripture union is starting with that. Please help, Lord, please help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and the
It's-
story of the angels coming to visit Abraham.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would it have been a different story if Abraham hadn't offered food
Mm-hmm.
and rest?
And rest. Yeah.
So when I was a child, I lived on Railroad Street in a very little town with 3 streets. And Railroad Street obviously looked over at the railroad. And I remember hobos going by, and I remember people knocking on the door and my mother giving them food. And they were complete strangers. And I remember my dad giving people coats. And I mean, just, it was a very different life. Nobody knocks on my door.
No, same here.
So how do I
Right.
mean, yeah, there are organizations I can go to, but the organization removes the personal attachment to that. So how do I mean, this is just a practical question. How do we engage with the ISIS person that crosses our path, maybe? How do we engage with them and extend hospitality? They used to come to us, and now we have to go to them. How do we do that in a real human way? I work on a board, and we talk about DEIA a lot. So doing that without being patronizing.
Patronizing.
And how do you do that where you really are doing those things? And
Mhm.
how do we do that in our personal lives from our faith perspective? I just really it's a conversation in my head a lot.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I'm in a place where I lived for 40 some years in Wisconsin, and I'm getting to know this community, which is full of MAGAs. And it's a very different world than what I was used to. And yet it's also full of original people who say, well, we're old Montana. So we've got that real conflict here. So I don't know, how do I reach out? How do I get to know them? What ways? What are my ways? What are my pathways? What are your pathways? I'm just, how do we practically live this faith?
Yeah.
Full disclosure here.
Biggest question.
My home is kind of my little hole, my little sanctuary. The idea of welcoming people into my home beyond the briefest, come on in, have supper. Hey, it's 9 o'clock. Maybe you should go home and go to bed.
Yeah.
Like me.
Yep.
This is difficult for me.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult for me. I live on an incredibly busy street. And I never answer if somebody comes to my front door, I do not answer it.
Yeah.
Right.
So and that's just it, right? I don't know that hospitality is always bringing them into our safe
Right.
space. But what does that mean then? Where do I go to practice this? How do I guess I'm looking for some, I mean, I try to do it, and I do it in the organizations that I'm part of. I try to reach out to the person on the fringes and make sure, but I never feel like I understand hospitality today.
Yeah.
Because
When,
it's gotten bureaucrat. You know, I've been on Echo for a long time, and it's a big part of hospitality. But it's gotten very, our last meal, again, instead of inviting people to sit together and break bread as part of our community meal, We were just handing out boxes.
Yeah,
at
that
the
makes
door.
me cry.
It makes me very upset. Well, yeah. And what's the reason? Because the place we're doing it says, well, we want our place kept cleaner. I'm trying to be good.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, and even the First Congregational Church, which does that once a month,
Yeah.
but they just hand out bags. I mean, and they have a huge plant, for want of a
So
different
does
word.
John's.
But
Okay.
you know, it's I think about how when, let's see, Annie was from 3 to 5, so I don't know, 48 years ago, we lived at St. Francis House, which is on the corner of University, and I can't remember the name of the street, but it's right on University Avenue near campus.
Madison, Catherine. She's talking about Madison.
Yeah, Madison. Sorry, I forgot Catherine. Minnesotan. And at that time, about 16 students lived there. And we were constantly hit up for money by mostly people who in the 60s had taken way too many drugs and could no longer function in the world. And, you know, so the priest taught us all about how you don't offer money, you offer food.
Mhm.
And we had food vouchers that we could give to people if they seemed to be really hard up. We could offer to give them some of our communal food because we ate together. And sometimes though they would come at night and want a place to stay, and sometimes it was given to them and sometimes not because it seemed too dangerous. Because I mean, we all lived there. We were all going to bed there. And I remember having the police come in for a house meeting once with a psychologist who lived in a very Tony neighborhood on Madison's west side. And the police were like, you know, we promise you we won't do anything harsh to them, but we're trained to take care of people who are, because sometimes people would come and they'd be so high, they'd be just completely out of it. And, you know, we'll give them a safe place to sleep for the night. And the psychologist was all, well, you're in a church and you need to offer hospitality to these people. And I said, well, we gladly drive them to your house. And he was like, oh, no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah, yeah.
But, I mean,
Wow.
and the people who lived there were teenagers.
Yeah.
They weren't graduate students. I mean, we were the old people who lived there. We were the house parents. But it really made us stop and think about hospitality and what God means by hospitality in ways that I just can't even hardly imagine now that I live in a house out in the country where we are very cautious if somebody comes to the door.
Yeah. Well, so he writes a couple things on page 132 that doesn't answer the question, but maybe will help us a little. He writes, when studying this passage, so he's in the middle of Acts 19, the resistance in Ephesus. So he says, right in the smack dab in the middle of the page, 132, when studying this passage, I like to ask groups. So we're a group here. What should the church's resistors be worried about in your neighborhood right now? What businesses, ideologies, or political interests have reason to feel jeopardized by the Christian witness about Jesus? And what could change if the church's members realized the influence they actually possess? I don't know. And then in the middle of the next paragraph, commitment to Jesus Christ is supposed to influence how we live in the world. A person's Christian faith and eagerness to see thy kingdom come should make a difference in how that person uses money, votes in elections, raises children, understands obligations to his or her neighbors, and knows when it's time to walk away from a job or some other requirement. There's not one way, he says, of doing things, but that we have to allow our faith to inform all aspects of our lives. So that's the question I think Annette is asking. I think that's the question we're always asking. What does that look like in our day-to-day lives?
Because life is different and we're so polarized, right? And the comment that Jane said about the hatred that we're seeing, we see that in the violence. How do we offer hospitality?
Right. In the midst of that.
That's terrifying.
How do we offer hospitality in our churches when we are encouraged to put caution for people's safety over having open doors and inviting people in? And that's a real threat. That's not imaginary.
So I don't know if you guys are familiar with St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Beloit.
Yeah.
And they do Wednesday soup lunch. They started it. My neighbor in Beloit started it in the late 80s. And they do it every Wednesday. And people come in. And through COVID, of course, they gave out the soup lunch, but they're back to meeting in person. And they're in a really rough neighborhood in Beloit. And word on the street in Beloit is, you don't mess with St. Paul's, they feed us. And they've not had, well, I haven't talked to Jan in about a year, but she's a friend of mine who is now more in charge. My neighbor has since died, my old neighbor has since died, and Jan Knudsen is one of the leaders in that, still very active outreach. And they don't get graffiti. They don't get tires slashed in their parking lot. My basketry guild met there for 15 years. We would meet at night. We never were worried. It was in a rough section. We never worried about coming and going because we were in their parking lot. And that sounds really strange, but it's true. What we do to those people, what we give to those people, is that hospitality. I mean, when you talk about Sodom and Gomorrah is a story of not giving hospitality. I mean, this is a story of giving hospitality. Anyway, it's an interesting thing. They feed, I don't know, 50 to 70 people every week. And it's just a group of volunteers that just make soup and feed the people. And it's interesting how they are a safe spot in a dangerous neighborhood. I don't know. To me, that's one of the pictures in my mind of hospitality today. But I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how to make it more personal.
Well, and that they have enough people to be able to do that without killing off all of them.
I think it's a rotating group of 8 people. 8
Wow.
to 10 people. But people know about it in Beloit. You know, it's not uncommon for them to have somebody stop by and donate 10 pounds of hamburger or, whatever, because that's what the community around them is doing, because they see what they're doing. And the church keeps helping them buy groceries. It's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when did we like the Echo thing? I mean, I know it had to change during COVID, but it's never gone back.
It drives me crazy, just crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I've been talking, I'll try and talk about us working with having an open building during the cold weather.
Hmm.
And I'm going to bring it up for vestry again, but the thing is that gifts started when people just said, oh, let's open the doors at St. John Vianney. And it wasn't all the bureaucracy that you've got to have everything in place. And I think that's part of what has hurt hospitality, is that we've become so involved in every little box has to be in place first before we do something. And, maybe Abraham's wife had the bread dough ready when they made it for the angels. I don't know. But, we need to maybe open up a little more, less plan ahead and more, yes, we can do this. And that's what Beloit's doing.
Yeah, and there's to learn that there's I mean, I'm certainly not in favor of poisoning anyone with ill-prepared food, but there's a big difference between hospitality and a commercial kitchen. And I mean, like, it seems to me to be totally ridiculous that the people who stay at Gifts Now may not cook anything in the kitchen because they haven't been trained by health service officials.
Oh my.
We get pretty bureaucratic, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Our
Well,
whole
there's
nation will
the-
become that way.
And
The
maybe
quest-
that's why it's working at St. Paul's, is that they don't have a commercial kitchen and they just come in and make soup with whatever ingredients they have. They have like the standard ingredients. These are the things you can donate, and then they make soup with those every week. It's interesting. But yeah, that's a very interesting point, that we get caught up in the rules. Oh, we're such good rule followers, aren't we?
We are, yeah.
Or
Catherine,
is it just a way to
yeah, I think
avoid having to do it?
it is.
I'm one a situation that I'm come into contact with almost daily is people when I go to the grocery store, or every single time I go to church and come home, there's people on the street corner with a sign wanting donations of money. Every time I go to Target or in Cub, every time I go to church. And I just, there has to be, and there'll be, you just pray that you're not at a stop sign right next to this person. You know, that the light is green and you can just go right straight through, and there's a whole line of people in these expensive cars just going right past these people who just look like they're at the end of their rope.
Why
But
does it make you want to pass by really quickly?
To not look in their eyes.
Yes. I don't know. I mean,
Are you afraid of them?
No, I'm not afraid of them, because I'm afraid of what well, that's an interesting question. I don't want to give them any money. Sometimes I do, but normally I don't. I mean, there's other places for these people to go.
It's true.
rather than just stand and that doesn't seem to be, you know, there's better places, better help for these people.
And that's a really hard one. I live in a small enough city that so I had to buy a different car and we sold a car. And so we parked it out by Target because we live on a street where nobody could drive by anymore. So we had to park it where people drove by. So we were trying to sell this car. And it was interesting to do that and go by in the morning and then pick it up different times because we needed to get it off their parking lot. Anyway, we watched the changing of the guard in some of our homeless people. And it was interesting to see that some of the regulars at Target have a really nice big truck. And so they're professional beggars.
Yes,
And we have a professional beggar that is always at the grocery store that we use. And they exchange, like there's 3 of them. And because it's a small city, you get to know who's at Target and you get to know who's there. But if you go to certain parts of the city, there really are the homeless where you can really see the difference, where they're pushing their carts, they're close to God's love, which houses people. And so what's sad about that is the people on those corners are getting the handouts, and the people that are downtown and are living in tents and pushing their carts are left behind. And so now when I drive by those people in those prominent areas, I'm like, sorry guys, this is not where I'm giving my money. Right. But at God's love, they're sitting there and they're really working. Ralph told me he was at the library yesterday and had somebody who was obviously not clearly in his full mind asking for a jump, and Ralph tried to help him and, tried to explain what he would need. And I don't know, he just gave him some options of how to get his truck started. So that's really a need, right? That's a different kind of person than the guy who's getting in the big truck and having his buddy come out and now beg for money. So it's really interesting to be in this smaller community and to actually see the real needs and the maybe not so much needs.
Mhm.
And I think the personal dilemma of once I give money, I have no control over what happens to that money. No matter what, I don't have a clue what that person's been through, what their life story is, whether or not they truly need it, what they're going to use it for. Are they going to just buy alcohol, or are they going to go buy some food? I don't know. And so how careful do we want to be in making those decisions? And I go back to the healing of the guy on the pool deck. What's that story called?
Siloam, the pool of Siloam.
The healing of the guy on the pool deck. So, years and years and years and years, his entire existence, he's been, I might be conflating a couple stories here, possibility. But anyway, the guy gets healed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are the implications for that guy getting healed? He has to go to work now. There's this whole, change of life that transformation and transformational stories are really hard too, right? Because the people you described, Annetta, the professional ones, who are on the corners and probably have a whole, they remind me a little bit of Oliver Twist. There is a person in charge, and they bring their money in, and they get paid X amount of dollars. Maybe they get a place to stay. Who knows? That's then there, and then there's the ones that are truly out on the street all that we have no knowledge of any of that, and that does not change the question.
And Pope Francis says
Changes
that you should give money to anyone who asks for it, and that it's not our responsibility to wonder what they're going to do with it.
Exactly.
I go back and forth with that. Like
Me too.
sometimes I go, yeah, I should not care about that. It's not my problem. And then I go, wait, I don't gamble either.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's that idea that I do have a responsibility for the gifts that God has given to me to have ownership and to give. So I mean, I really do. That's something I really struggle with. Do I hand that there where I don't know what it's going to do? Or do I say, how do I multiply these talents that God has given me, these coins? And so it's to give it to God's love. I know it will feed needy people. And to give it to Food Share, I know it will feed needy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so then to give it to this person on the street who
The guy who
I
is the
know is going to be
professional.
there tomorrow, and then his buddy's going to be there at 3 o'clock, and you know what I mean. Then I go, is that really responsible? So like, and then I go, well, it's not really my business, and then I go, well, but excuse me, but it is. So I'm very conflicted. Can you tell?
Yeah.
Amen.
Right there with you.
Go ahead.
No,
Julie.
we should
What is the
all
professional?
have food vouchers or dollar bills stacked up in our car.
I
And
have friends who used to always carry, as they think they
And-
still do, always carry food,
yeah, or something
gift
from
certificate.
McDonald's gift. Yep.
and would hand those out. Yeah.
Mhm.
Jane, you've been wanting to say something.
The guy who is the professional beggar, we bellyache about people not working. That is his job. And,
It is.
and
I agree with you.
also giving it out to other people as well.
Yep. Yeah.
So we're judging again. We're playing God.
Well,
Right, but again, I have that money that is getting gifted to me. Now, what do I decide to do with it?
Yeah.
So I can
Because we
decide
want to play God.
invest in him, or I can invest in God's love. It's a conflict.
that's it. That is the bottom line, is that we are, it's not simple, and we are
Yeah.
conflicted.
Because
And
we wanna play God.
I always, as far as safety goes, I've always felt that a church's doors should be open. And then that once you start a service, you keep those churches open. And then I think, well, what if a shooter comes on in? And then I think, well, I'm ready to go. So if they kill me, okay, fine. That's just.
I think you're right, though. It's important to think about it. I get in a car and drive every day without being worried that I'm going to die on the street.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to lock those doors, then I'm saying I'm scared of the future, and yet we don't know what the future is getting in my car.
Right. We never know what the future is. And how do we trust God? I mean, I think that's a legitimate question to ask. Do we trust God? What do we trust God with? And
it could be horrific.
It is. And death is part of life.
And horrors are part of life. And we have to trust God to walk with us through
in
it.
the midst of all of that. Exactly.
And big synagogues all over probably the world, but certainly all over the country, have hired security teams.
Yes.
Oh, they have. They have. Yeah.
What's next week?
So
I found a passage in Acts that I really liked.
Okay.
It's 17. I guess starting at verse 26. From one ancestor he made all nations to inhabit the whole earth, and he allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though he indeed is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. as even some of your own poets have said. For we too are his offspring. I really like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perhaps search for God and perhaps grope for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great spot, I think, for us to end.
Mhm.
I know I'm not putting this book away. It's truly, I mean,
No.
the question I asked at the very back is, what is God making possible? That in not in just Acts, but just in this world, what is God making possible?
I'll see you guys next week.
Are they, bye-bye. Are they,
Bye, Jane.
is God making, you know, God's grace makes places that are more hospitable, more inclusive, more forgiving, and more daring. What?
Very.
Daring is a hard
Yeah.
one, right? It's like risk taking.
I
Mhm.
like that. That's a challenge, right? That's the
Mhm.
challenge of our faith.
Yeah. Yeah. How are we daring in building God's kingdom?
Mhm.
I think
I'm
the
not very-
Episcopal Church in particular struggles
Yeah.
with daring
Yeah.
because tradition is what we're all about.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
There's
that,
safety in tradition.
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm not very daring. I think the older I get, the less daring I get.
Yeah.
I think maybe just the opposite. I don't know.
I think church ways are more daring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, where our church has, Trinity Church has that wonderful Lucille Wells scholarship that's grown to quite a bit of money and has a lot of rules attached to it. And Julie Westby and I are both on that committee, and both of us kind of think there need to be other ways to reach out to kids
Wow.
to get them to want to come to church or at least be part of something, and not to make the rule that you have to give back to Trinity, but that you have to give back to what is the least of these.
Mm.
And so if a kid doesn't want to serve at the altar or be a reader or an usher, but wants to go work in a soup kitchen where they serve a meal
Yeah.
once a week that's not affiliated with the church,
Mhm.
then fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, now there's this big discussion because we have kids, or a kid in particular, who's been really hurt by the church and doesn't feel comfortable coming all the time anymore. And how do other people in that kid's family are very active in the church. How do we help that kid to know that Trinity loves and supports that kid, even if that kid doesn't show up but a few times a year?
Yeah.
How do we encourage that kid to do what God calls us to do?
Show them
And-
the bigger church.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, but wait a minute, that's not what the guidelines say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was telling it to Greg the other day, and I said, they're probably going to throw me out someday.
But that's a place that you're daring. That's good,
Yeah.
right?
That's daring.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's hard though to be daring, I think. I'm really going to ponder that for this week.
Mhm.
Well, the very last line of Acts talks about proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah. And our author makes a point of saying he is thankful that it isn't all tied up with a pretty little bow, right? That ending is we know that Paul goes on to get his life. They all do. They all suffer and die. That's what daring does, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
So moving forward.
Yeah.
Thank
Um,
you for this discussion. Lady.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good discussion.
don't go away yet.
Okay.
I think there is something to be said for Jane Syme's desire to start with Genesis
Makes sense.
and then move into Exodus. Unless we decide we hate Peter Enns by then, which I don't think will happen.
I have a question. I don't remember how long my last Peter Enns book was, and it's not at my fingertips. So are we looking then at having our next two studies be Genesis and then Exodus, or will we consider taking a break in the middle? Because like you said, it's not that you get tired, that you don't like somebody, but you might want to interject a short study that changes the way you think about things from a
Yeah.
different perspective.
Well, if I can find it.
So I
Here,
was just wondering
this
how
is Romans for Normal People, but this is
Okay.
about the size of the For Normal People book.
Okay.
Mhm.
I was just wondering because Genesis and Exodus are like this long.
Well, it
Very
might be
deep.
nice to do something, to do the Genesis one and then do something
Yeah.
that's really applicable to Lent.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's suggesting we get through this before, but we don't have to. I mean, I think you're right, Catherine, that when we get to Lent, whether we're done with Genesis, it would be fun to do something particular for Lent too. Yeah.
I would like that.
I know of a church that just finished Genesis and they'd been studying it for 2 years.
Yeah, it could go forever. Yeah.
Or we could just do Exodus, which, brings us up to Passover.
Yeah. Do you think we'd get that far?
Hmm.
I'm happy to go. I'm happy to do Genesis. I'm happy to do Exodus. I understand doing Genesis and then Exodus. However, nothing is chronological, so I'm not sure that it matters much other than one is before the other in the.
And I feel like we delved really sort of deeply into Genesis with a womanist midrash.
Mhm.
Cool, Gaffney. I think we did too. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think Peter Enns will bring really good questions to those things, probably similar questions. Because all through reading the Peter Enns book we read, all I could hear Will Gaffney in my ear the whole time. Yeah.
So I'm up for anything.
Yeah, me too. But I like the idea of doing something different for Lent. It's always a good time to like change your habit and think differently.
Yeah. And so we've got it'll be another week. So half of January, all of February, and half of March. And then we hit Ash Wednesday. So 2, 4, 5, 6, 8 weeks approximately before we get to Lent.
Do you have the Exodus for Normal People with you, or?
No, it's on its way here. So I can't.
Okay.
I can't tell you.
Well, let me see what it says.
Yes, he got a little synopsis.
I'm looking. I'm looking to see if I can find a table of contents. It's only 152 pages.
The book is? Wow,
Mhm.
that's a quick read, huh? How much is our acts was about that, huh?
Yeah,
150?
140 something.
Yeah, well,
About the same. It's
about
nice
this.
to-
How long did it take us to do this, to do Acts?
Well, we
5
did
weeks?
it up on
No,
How many chapters are in it? It took us like 2 weeks longer than the number of chapters because we
Do you want me to go? Well, oh, this is almost over. Well,
6.
go ahead. That's fine.
I bet let's look at what was not about 9 weeks, I would bet. Did it take us that long?
Yeah, I think it did because we took
A couple
Yeah.
of weeks and a couple of
Yeah.
them. Yeah. Let's say 9 weeks. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That gets us just about to Lent.
I like.
Okay, do you want me to make an executive decision?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Sure.
Exodus.
Okay.
Got it.
And then we'll pick up something interesting for Lent.
Okay.
So again, start keeping your ears open for what you think is interesting for Lent.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. Okay, great conversation, guys. Thank you so much.
Love you
Bye-bye.
all.
See you next week. Take
And-
care, everyone.
Sharon, you're gonna just send out the link to
The
the,
lectionary, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Stay
Thanks.
warm, everyone.
Bye-bye.